السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll go through the 15th juz with regards to some of the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this juz. And this is basically Surah Al-Isra, and a portion of Surah Al-Kahf. Surah Al-Isra and a portion of Surah Al-Kahf. There's some commands from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Isra that are very important for every Muslim to learn. And it's muhkamat. That means it's not something that changed or abrogated or have differences of opinions. It's all clear, straightforward wasaya, commands that we need to observe. But from the beginning of the surah, Surah Al-Isra, as we know that it talks about the journey of the Prophet ﷺ, when he was taken from Mecca to Jerusalem and then to the heavens. But in the beginning of the surah, it talks about Bani Israel and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He chose them to be the people that carry the truth. And He entrusted them with that truth, that if they disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send the disbelievers unto them to punish them in this life by the command of Allah, by the decree of Allah. And this is what happened to them. And as Imam Sa'di rahimahullah said in his tafsir, and this is a warning for this ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, if they follow the ways of the people of Bani Israel before by spreading sins and disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also will send people to humiliate them. So that means it's the command of Allah to be firm upon the deen of Allah and to understand your position in this life, that you are the people that have the truth, that they have the responsibility to be upon the truth and to call others to the truth. The Quran guides to what is best, so therefore follow the guidance of the Quran, as it's mentioned in verse number 9. Verse number 11, it talks about one of the things that human beings they do, which is evil. That means we are commanded not to do that. وَيَدْعُ الْإِنسَانُ بِالشَّرِّ دُعَاءَهُ بِالْخَيْرِ وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا, which means the human beings, they are in haste. Sometimes they make dua against their own selves or their own families or their own children with evil, with death, with cursing them. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted their dua, right, they will all be destroyed. And the Prophet ﷺ forbade us clearly from this. He says, لا تدعوا على أنفسكم ولا على أموالكم. Do not make dua against yourself or against your wealth. And توافقوا من الله ساعة إجابة يستجيب فيها, that you might be at the time when it's the time where the acceptance of the dua is there and your dua will be accepted. So that means we are forbidden from making dua against our own selves, our own children, our own wealth at moment of anger or so. Of course, the verses talks about, like verse number 18 and 19, about, again, the hastiness of the human beings, that people are in haste to get whatever they can in this life, and they don't work for the hereafter. So with al-Iman, with faith, it's supposed to be the other way around. We're supposed to make mujahada to ourselves. We're supposed to struggle with our own selves, not to make ourselves in haste, not to make ourselves always want what is best in this life and that's it, without paying attention to the hereafter. So this is an important thing to be upon and to stay away from the ways of the disbelievers when they do these types of things. The verses that talks about the commands of Allah starts with verse number 23. Verse number 23, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ. So the command of Allah to worship Him alone, and we are forbidden from associating partners with Allah, and to be kind to the parents. And with all what that means, every command, we should make sure that we understand what it means and how it's to be applied, not from our understanding of the linguistics of the words. So if the verse says وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, to do good to the parents, what that means. We have Quran, we have hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, we have actions to follow, and therefore to be kind to the parents, that means to do good things for them, to be away from what upsetting them, and at the same time without disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And especially when they're old in age and you witness them when they're old, do not even say uff to them, which is the smallest amount of discomfort that you would show to them. Never show to them any. It is sufficient for the believers that this is a command of Allah, but even if it's not the command of Allah, the human beings, how ignorant they are when they forget the favors that others would do to them. And there's no one on the face of earth has more favor upon us as far as the human beings, those we witness in our life, more than our parents. They were the reason for our existence, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed for that. The same thing with the people of knowledge and how they give us the real life by instructing us of the real life of this world. And the kindness to the parents, we get to know that with the knowledge of the deen of Islam. So do not scold them, say to them what is best, and this is all commands from Allah to more than one command. First of all, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, be kind to the parents. That's number one. Do good to them. Number two, do not say uff to them, the smallest amount of or any sign of discomfort. Do not tanharhuma, do not scold them. Another command, وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا, say beautiful and generous speech. And the significance part of قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا, that it's a speech that is kareem. How can a speech be kareem? How can a speech be generous? That means, when you're generous, you're giving something from yourself with goodness, that you're not upset when you're giving it. Otherwise, the person is not generous. So be generous with your parents with a nice speech. Don't just say some words and that's it. You see how sometimes the children, the way they speak to their parents, sometimes they give a word to word. Regardless, of course, of the other evil stuff. But say to them generous speech. Say to them nice things and things like this. And another command, وَخْفِضْ لَهُمَ جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ, which means humble yourself to them. Humble yourself to them with your actions. And another command, وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا, and say, O my Lord, ارْحَمْهُمَا, have mercy upon them, as they raised me when I was young. And by the way, this dua, some people, they only make dua for their parents after their parents dies. It's supposed to be in their lifetime. In their lifetime, you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for your parents and to say, رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. Oh Allah, my Lord, have mercy upon them as they had raised me when I was young. So you're being grateful to them, because if you're grateful to them, you are grateful to Allah. أَنُشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرُ. Be grateful to me, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and to your parents. So see how many commands here when in these two verses with regards to the parents, right? Maybe like six commands related to the parents. آتِ ذَا الْقُرْبَ حَقَّهُ, give the relatives the rights, money, zakah, and the poor and the wayfarer. These are commands from Allah to give zakah. So that means we need to know our zakah. We need to give our zakah to make sure that it reaches the right people. And those who are closer to us, they have more rights than others. وَلَا تُبَذِّرْ تَبْذِيرًا. Tabdhir is when someone would spend in a sinful way, whether it's called a spendthrift or so wastefully, wasting one's money. Excessiveness or israf is one thing, we are forbidden from that. And a tabdhir is even if it's 1 penny in haram. Anything in haram is called tabdhir. And they are the brothers of the shayateen, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَكَانَ الشَّيْطَانُ يُرَبِّي كَفُورًا. And the shaitan was kafura, disbeliever, ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to spend your money in ways or in things that is not appropriate, it's not halal, makes a person brothers to the shayateen. As Mujahid said, لو أنفق إنسان ماله كله في الحق. If a person spends all of his money in the haqq, in the truth, he's not mubadhir, he's not falling under this warning. But ولو أنفق مدا في غير حقه كان تبذيرا. And if he spent one handful in the way that it's not ought to be spent, then that's considered to be tabdhij. So to stay away from spending money on haram. And still talking about the parents, وَإِمَّا تُعْرِضَنَّ عَنْهُمْ ابْتِغَاءَ رَحْمَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكَ تَرْجُوهَا فَقُل لَّهُمْ قَوْلًا مَيْسُورًا. And this is to the relatives too. And if they ask you and you don't have anything to give them, then say to them something nice. Say to them something kind. Give them, if something comes to me, I'll help you. Things like this. فَقُل لَّهُمْ قَوْلًا مَيْسُورًا. فَقُل لَّهُمْ قَوْلًا مَيْسُورًا. Another command afterwards, again, it's all these set of verses. Do not make your hand tied to your neck, which means do not be greedy. Do not be greedy to others, and do not extend it all the way. That means do not do excessive spending. Otherwise, you'll regret. So that means when you spend wisely, you won't regret. Some people, when they have lots of money, they spend foolishly, and then things changes, and that's how life is. Life doesn't stay for everybody the same at all times. So ما عَلَى مَنْ اقْتَصَدْ, as some said, that he is not going to be poor, the one that is spending wisely. But there's always a fine line between being greedy versus being excessive spender. So to be wise when spending, and to see what's halal, what's haram, and things like this. And to have the belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He bestows the rizq upon whoever He wills, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another command from Allah, do not kill your children out of the fear of poverty. This is where the like of abortion and the like of this, people would kill their children because they don't know how they're going to raise them, or because they're poor. And the same thing applies for those who don't want to have children because of this. It's haram to say that I don't want to have children because I'm poor. This is not for you. This is the rizq is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, a person, yes, can say that they don't want children. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decree for them to have children, they will have children. But you can say for other reasons or whatever, but not for the reason of the lack of money or so. But killing them, of course, it's a major sin. It's haram. Stay away from zina. And the command from Allah is not to commit zina, but rather to stay away from it. So anything that leads to it. That's why anything that leads to zina is forbidden. From gazing, from free mixing, from not lowering the gaze, from being alone with someone, all of these types of hijab and so on. Also forbidding killing, and forbidding on the family of those who were killed wrongfully not to be excessive. Like if someone was killed, right? Of course, justice, people want to seek justice, right? So the family of the one that was killed, they should not go beyond the limits and to do evil as a result of that. Some people, out of ignorance, if someone is harmed in their family, they go out and they retaliate on their own hands without referring back to the authorities and things. Also, do not approach the wealth of the orphans. So on an orphan, the orphan is the one that his father died before the age of puberty. So someone is in charge of his wealth, do not approach it. And if you spend from their wealth because they need to be spent upon, you spend wisely with goodness and as if you are themselves and you care for them, not to waste it. Fulfilling the covenant, and people will be asked about their covenants. Fulfill the matters of transactions and buying and selling and ways and things like this. And don't say things without knowledge, because indeed hearing and eyesight and the heart, everything will be asked about. Do not walk on the face of earth with arrogance, with conceit and arrogance. Just the walk. I mean, even though arrogance is in the heart, but the way that sometimes people walk in a way of arrogance, this is haram. And the ayah says, you're not going to get into the, إِنَّكَ لَن تَخْرِقَ الْأَرْضِ. You cannot neither, penetrate the earth, nor can you attain like the mountains and high. You're just a human being. You're in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's foolish. That's why when you see someone is arrogant as a human being, some people think that this is maybe some form of a self-confidence. No, there's a difference between self-confidence and arrogance. Arrogance is a foolish thing. Someone is arrogant, he's a fool. You should not deal with that person because he's not he's not mentally stable, if it's correct to say, because he's arrogant. He doesn't know that he's a human being, that when his stomach hurts, he runs to the bathroom. Why arrogance? There's no need for arrogance. So this is all forbidden, and there's of course applications to this, and we need to learn that, of course, by learning the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is from the hikmah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, and forbidding having anything or anyone that is to be worshipped besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are commanded to take lessons and to have the proper understanding and reminders of the Quran. Like verse number 41, وَلَقَدْ صَرَّفْنَا فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ لِيَذَّكَّرُوا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned so many different ayat in warning, in glad tidings, in evidences, all kinds of things, admonitions. For what reason? لِيَذَّكَّرُوا, for them to be reminded. So what's the matter with us, basically? We don't want to say about other people. We need to reflect upon our own selves. When we listen to the Quran in Ramadan from the beginning to the end, how many of the evidences that are mentioned in the Quran with the Tawheed versus Shirk? How many of the warnings against evil, against haram? How many commands from Allah to have the fear of Allah, to have the taqwa of Allah? So are we getting the remembrance of it? لِيَذَّكَّرُوا. So لِيَذَّكَّرُوا is not to know, is not to say I know, or yes, I understand. It's about applying this in our life, to be affected by it. Because the disbelievers, it increase them. The more they listen to the Quran, the more they repel and they turn away from it. At-tasbih, to make tasbih to Allah, tahmid, to recite the Quran. Because if you recite the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect the Prophet ﷺ as a result of the recitation of the Quran. All kinds of ways that the disbelievers, they say and they do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also commanding the believers, a beautiful verse number 53 in Surah Al-Isra. وَقُلْ لِعِبَادِي يَقُولُ الَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنزَغُ بَيْنَهُمْ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ كَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوًّا مُبِينًا. That needs a lecture by itself. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to command the believers to say in their speeches and their conversations and in their text messages, in their whatever they have a form of communication, to say the best. التي هي أحسن. أحسن means the best. Not just say some nice words. وَقُلْ لِعِبَادِي يَقُولُوا التي هي أحسن. What is the best? What's the best? The best way is not what you feel necessarily, not what's in your heart necessarily, to say what is best. But if someone doesn't like someone, some people think it's to be honest and truthful, is just to say to them, you're the worst person on the face of earth, you're this and that. No, it's haram to say that. Say the best. There's a difference between advising a person for the best of his interest, but to say the best. And then to remember, because the shaitan, يَنْزَغُ بَيْنَهُم. The shaitan, he is يَنْزَغ. يَنْزَغ, that means he is when he comes in a way that is subtle, that you don't see him. You don't see the shaitan. You don't feel the shaitan. And it's, subhanAllah, almost every dispute that people are in, whether it's a family dispute or people in the community, whatever there is, both parties, both sides, they don't see the shaitan. You can rarely find someone, as Yusuf alayhi salam, subhanAllah, when he said at the end of Surah Yusuf, if you remember, when he said, مِن بَعْدِ أَن نَزَغَ الشَّيْطَانُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ إِخْوَتِي. Yusuf alayhi salam, he said, after the shaitan nazagh came between me and my brothers, and he started with himself first. He did not say, after my brothers did what they did of that evil thing when they threw me in the well. And then compare this to our disputes. You sit with people, when two people are, they're fighting with each other. They don't say the shaitan made my brother say this about me. The shaitan made my brother that I'm in dispute with, did this to me. I mean, even Yusuf alayhi salam did not say it this way. But rather, a person always see himself versus the other side. And that's clear disobedient to the command of Allah. Right? And then we blame ourselves or blame whatever, why the things are happening the way it's happening. There's no way that we have to overpower ourselves. We have to make mujahada to ourselves, according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. So وَكُلِّ عِبَادِي يَقُولُ الَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Let them say what is best, first of all, because if you say what is best, most of the disputes that happens between us, between people, it's not going to exist. And then remember, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنْزَغُ بَيْنَهُم. Because indeed the shaitan is the one that is going between them, going back and forth. And he's the one that putting thoughts in your mind. Oh, look what he said. Oh, who does he think he is? And then, and so on. إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ كَانَ الْإِنسَانِ عَدُوًّا مُبِينًا. He is a clear enemy to the human beings. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us benefit from all of these commands. Of course, there are many more, and one of which, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanding, when he commanded the malaika to make sujood to Adam, and showing the ways of the shaitan, and what does he do to the people, and not to listen to the shaitan, and to understand that he is only, if he promises you delusion, and there's no reality to what he promises you to. So stay away from shaitan and read the Quran and seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned about being firm and steadfast upon the deen of Allah, and seek steadfastness from Allah, because otherwise they want you to compromise. And this is in verse number 74 and afterwards, and 73. They'll make you their best friend if you compromise the deen of Allah. The command from Allah to establish the salah, the 5 daily salah, to make the tahajjud prayer, وَمِنَ اللَّيْلِ فَتَهَجَّدْ بِهِ نَافِلَةً لَكَ, the night prayer. To say رَبِّ أَدْخِلْنِي مُدْخَلَ صِدْقٍ وَأَخْرِجْنِي مُخْرَجَ صِدْقٍ, in anything that make you, that you enter anything, that you exit anything, to be upon truthfulness. The Quran is pure, never to be in disparity from the mercy of Allah. And many verses that talks about the power of Allah, calling people to the truth and things like this. There's a sajda where we're commanded to make sujood and to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his names and attributes, not to raise your voice in salah, not to make it completely silent, but something in between. And if you're praying in jama'ah, the one next to you should not hear anything of what you're saying. If you're praying alone and it's Maghrib, Isha, or Fajr, you can say it out loud but not screaming. The same thing with the night prayer. And the command from Allah to make takbir, to say Allahu Akbar. Surah Al-Kahf. Afterwards, it's a blessed surah that it's recommended to recite after every Jumu'ah, and it talks about the different types of fitan that we face in this life. So it's basically to avoid the fitan, to avoid the trials and tribulations, to be upon al-iman, to seek steadfastness, whether it's the fitna of the religion as the people of the cave, or the fitna of wealth as the one with the 2 gardens, or the fitna of knowledge as the story of Al-Khadr, or the fitna of power as Dhul Qarnayn, and to be able to deal with the fitna in the proper way. And of course, for example, the people of the cave, how they, to save their religion, and it was said that they were wealthy and they had materialistically a good life, but they left all of that and they went to a cave to protect their religion. So it's a clear command from Allah for us to protect our religion, never to compromise one's religion because this is how life is, or this is because of my job, because of my status, whatever there is. Religion comes first, and we need to hold fast to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this juz, وَاتْلُ مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ كِتَابِ رَبِّكَ, recite what has been revealed to you from the book of your Lord. وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ, be patient, make yourself patient with those who invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord, in the morning and in the evening. The Prophet ﷺ was commanded by Allah to stay with the people of Ahlul Suffah, the poor people. Stay with the believers, find the believers, find the best of the believers and stay with them. Have the company of the righteous people, those who are upon the proper understanding, proper aqidah, proper follow the sunnah, proper manners, iman and so on. Stay with them, be patient, make yourself patient with them. And don't extend your eyes to those who want the desires of this world, forbidding us from obeying those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made their hearts in forgetfulness and they followed their desires. Don't obey them. And subhanAllah, clear instructions so that we protect our deen and don't obey those who are heedless in this life. Then the story of the 2 gardens are mentioned, and how, of course, one is ungrateful to Allah versus the other one, which is good. Invite people, advise people, right? And to seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and understand that everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Don't argue with matters of the wahy, as verse number 54. وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرَ شَيْءٍ جَدَلًا. After the Quran is mentioned, human beings, they argue. So don't argue with the book of Allah. Just accept and understand and follow the book of Allah. So this is just in brief. And then the story of Musa alayhi salam is mentioned, but that's the 16th juz. So as you see that it's, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to follow the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to read the Quran as messages from Allah that we want to apply in our life. That we want to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us to apply it, and we should be patient with that, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. We'll continue, inshallah ta'ala, tomorrow. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, baraka Muhammad wa sahbihi sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Barakallahu feekum.